Behind the facade of this silly communist costume, there's immorality, there's greed, there's opportunism. Hey everybody, my name is Nick. I'm a director and editor, and today I'm going to be talking about the Chinese film A Touch of Sin, directed by Jia Zhangke. So, A Touch of Sin are 4 stories of real criminal incidents that happened in China. These news stories of violent crimes were taken and dramatized to fit into a very interesting message about how income inequality and harsh economic conditions can dehumanize oppressed individuals. So the stories in the film are one of a man who goes on a crusade because he's upset that the owner of a mine isn't sharing the profits with the workers. The second story is about a migrant worker who finds a gun and uses it. The third story is about a receptionist at a massage parlor who is propositioned by the customers for sexual services. And the fourth story is about a textile worker who's forced to pay for the injury that he caused to another worker, and it causes his life to kind of go down this bad path. All of these stories end in really shocking acts of violence. 4 stories added together really kind of drive home this message. We see it again and again in different forms, but in each story, the structure is the same. You have somebody who is not so powerful, being oppressed by this powerful system of corruption and greed, and it puts them into a position where they feel they need to do something violent. The violence comes out in different ways in each story, but it's always pretty gruesome and excessive. The first story for me of the miner going on a crusade because of the lack of profit sharing has some of the strongest allusions to the weak standing up to the powerful. And it's drawn out by a very important detail that the director puts into this film. In the first story, the mine worker Dahai, he wants to get revenge, and so he grabs this tiger flag before he goes out with a gun and goes on a rampage. Well, this is a really cool detail because it's more than likely an allusion to the story of Wu Song. Wu Song is a story from the ancient novel Water Margin, which is an ancient Chinese story. There's a lot of similarities between the story of Wu Song and what's happening in this film. So just to go over what happened in that ancient story, Wu Song sees this official notice when he's walking down the road that there's a tiger. He doesn't want to lose face, so he doesn't want to turn around. He has to keep moving forward. He's a little bit drunk, so he goes and falls asleep on a rock. When he's falling asleep, the tiger leaps out of the woods and shocks him awake. And Wu Song has to fight back against this tiger, but he breaks his stick that he's fighting with. And he ends up fighting this tiger with his bare hands and pinning it down and beating a tiger to death. Beats the tiger unconscious, then he picks up a staff and kills it with the staff. He is afraid that the tiger might wake up or that another tiger might come, so he runs away, and he comes across local hunters who are so impressed that he did this amazing thing, killing a tiger with his bare hands, that they end up giving him the job of chief constable. So this story is a little interesting because in this film we have a miner who is fighting against this corruption that he sees, and he's just this little person and he's fighting against this wider political corruption. And he brings this tiger flag with him when he's fighting against it. What I think is being said here is that in desperation, when fighting back for survival, the weak, somebody fighting against a tiger, which is very strong, can overcome that person. We have the rich, corrupt tiger of the state, and we have Wu Song, this drunken, sleepy guy who is so shocked that he ends up actually being able to beat the tiger with his bare hands. Somebody who knows a little bit more about ancient Chinese history or ancient Chinese literature could figure out a lot of different ways in which this film connects to that, because I definitely think this is an intentional thing that the director is calling back to. He's also kind of subtly commenting on how Western media has invaded the country and contributed to a lot of violence and ill effects. The way the characters fetishize guns in this is pretty interesting. And a lot of the filming in each of the events mimic crime films of the West. Wu Song going on his rampage is a lot like some kind of action film, like a John Woo action film. The migrant with his gun is a lot like a heist film or something like this. When we go to the receptionist and what she does, there's a very stylized, almost kung fu way that she engages in the violence. That is very interesting because that is kind of commenting on how kung fu, which is kind of developed in Asia, but it was developed in popular cinema almost to cater to the West because it became so popular in the West. So kind of kung fu films were used as a way for Asian cinema to be recognized by the West. There's a commentary going on here about what has happened to Chinese society, how the ancient kind of real Chinese society has been changed by Westernization, and the mindset of the people has been changed. And because what happens in this film is so violent, I definitely think that the director is commenting that some of these changes, this influence, this Western pop culture influence, has not been good for the country. With this kind of theme and message that we see, it would make sense that this film would be approved by communist censors in China, because I think it is clearly condemning Western influence and violence and corruption caused by capitalism. And yet, the interesting thing about this movie is that although it was cleared for foreign distribution and showed at international festivals, the film was supposed to be cleared for local distribution, but it never opened in China. And its release date kept being pushed back. This is what I found when I was researching on the Wikipedia. So far as I know, this film was never distributed locally. So this is an odd thing about living in a society that restricts free speech. Ostensibly the idea that political and economic corruption is bad should fit in with the stated goals of China. But I suppose that the problem with the movie is that the government doesn't want to admit that there are any faults in the society. And so it must censor anything that has, critical, interesting, kind of gray area interpretations. And certainly, the censors aren't entirely wrong to want to kind of not have this film be seen, because it's also obvious, while it is condemning Western influence, that this movie is shining a light on problems within China, because it's set in China and it's about real incidents that happened in China. And it's painting them in a way that is very critical of the corruption and humanizing the people that are engaging in the violence. There's a hypocrisy that we see come out in this film. For example, the first story, the miner is upset that the owner of the mine is not engaging in profit sharing, but he is getting rich himself. We see in this society that this is a capitalist idea that is coming out, and the pretense of communist ideals, like this thing of profit sharing, all the workers getting prosperity based on the work that they do, is not really evident in the society anymore, at least in this film. Later on in the film, in the final story, there is a moment in a massage parlor where all of the prostitutes march in skimpy Chinese communist uniforms. And I think this is a really good allusion to what is happening in the society. Morals and ideals are becoming this kitschy costume. And behind the facade of this silly communist costume, there's immorality, there's greed, there's opportunism. So if you think about it in that way, this film on a deeper level could be very critical of the Chinese Communist Party. On that hand, it kind of makes sense that they would want to censor it, although I would think that by not censoring it, they would draw less attention to those facts. But when you censor something like they do, then people are like, okay, so why don't they like this? And then you go looking for that meaning. Whereas if you were to just say, you know what, this is fine with us, then perhaps the message about the decadent West and the violence and the pop culture problems would come out more. That's just my opinion about why, free speech is good. For me, the best thing about this film is the illustration of the themes. Everything in this film is done very well, working the story together to draw out these interesting ideas. And it got me thinking a lot, and I definitely want to rewatch this film. I want to think about, how does the story of Wusong relate to this film? What are other things that are in this movie that I didn't know about, that I missed? There's a lot in here. I think it's a really deep movie. And so it makes sense that this film won Best Screenplay at the Cannes Film Festival. So I think this film definitely deserved that award because it was written so well. My only gripe is that as a viewing experience, the four stories were almost too similar. As I watched it, the tone in each of the four stories kind of felt the same. I kind of knew that each story was going to be somebody down on their luck, then some bad things happened, and then there was some violence that happened. And so I wasn't surprised as each story went on because I was kind of waiting for the structure to happen again. I think the connections that were drawn between the four stories as well felt a little tacked on and not natural as we kind of go back and learn, oh, this character met that character in the past. It never really felt that important or significant, and the connections just seemed to be made to kind of make us aware that all these things are happening in the same universe. But those are minor problems. I think overall this is a really interesting film that I want to watch and explore again. Jia Zhangke is an amazing director, and I want to watch more of his movies after watching this one. Let me know what you think in the comments. Are there any other of his films that I should watch? What do you think of this movie? Anything you noticed that I missed? Let me know, because I think this is a great movie, one that could be watched over and over again. So I'd be happy to check it out again. All right, see you guys next time. Bye.